Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today for our squash soiree. My name is Kitty. I'm a library associate at the Buckeye branch of Medina County District Library, and I am so excited to share with you today my love of squashes, talk a little bit about selecting the different varieties of squash that we see at this time of year, and different ways to prepare them. So let's get started. The first one you'll see here is a butternut squash, kind of that classic winter squash with a firm, dense flesh that turns pretty creamy after you cook it. You'll want to choose these squash that are heavier. The more dense and heavy they are, the more water they've retained, which means it's a more flavorful squash. Once it starts to get lighter, it's losing some of its water content and will lose a lot of flavor. These squash can be stored up to several months in a cool, dry, and dark place. So these can last pretty much all winter if you keep them in an adequate place in your kitchen or pantry. And you'll want to use these maybe as a replacement for pumpkin, potato, or sweet potato. They can really be either sweet or savory depending on how you prepare them. And of course, as you can see, they are full of great healthy vitamins and other elements for you, including vitamins A, C, B6, beta carotene, potassium, and fiber. One thing I would like to note about butternut squash is they can be a little bit difficult to peel and chop. So what I like to do is poke them all over with a fork, microwave them for 2 to 3 minutes, and then they're a little bit easier to peel and cut up for your recipes. A classic butternut squash recipe is butternut squash soup, maybe topped with a little bit of fried sage leaves, just a delicious, warming, hearty soup. You can chop it and roast it to eat as a side dish, or you can add the roasted cubes to salads or stews. You can puree the roasted cubes to make a pasta sauce, either fill raviolis or make a new twist on macaroni and cheese. And of course, you can stuff the squash like you would many of the other squash we'll look at today, with grains, a protein, vegetables, and cheese. Another squash you'll see a lot of at this time of year is the acorn squash, that has a sort of nuttier flavor but can also go that sweet or savory route. You'll want to select an acorn squash that is dark green in color with a small orange spot. The more orange on the squash, the older it is and the less flavorful it will be. So you'll want your squash to be mostly dark green. And these can also last a couple of months in cool, dark storage. Again, these are chock full of health benefits, and the skin is also edible and filled with fiber and antioxidants. You can eat that once it's been roasted. My favorite recipe was one my mom would always make when we were growing up with these, is stuffed acorn squash. She would stuff it with, I think it was sausage, apples, sometimes raisins, sometimes a grain like quinoa, and then butternut squash, brown sugar and maple syrup. And that's just always a delicious fall treat. You can kind of make whatever combination you want of different fall or autumn ingredients that you want to use. You can also just slice these and roast their halves, maybe add some herbs and Parmesan to give it a little more flavor. You can also chop these up, roast them, and add them to stews or salads. And again, try as a replacement for sweet potato or pumpkin in baking. These little squash are called delicatas, and they don't last quite as long as most of the other winter squash mentioned here. So a lot of times these won't be carried in larger grocery stores. You'll have to check farm markets or little farm shops. They are a very tender squash with a flavor similar to sweet potatoes, and the rind or skin is edible as well. And you'll want to select unblemished skinned squash that is creamy in color, has those dark green stripes, and maybe a little bit of orange in those dark green stripes as well. To prepare these, you can stuff them again with quinoa, maybe a fall fruit, herbs, or go the savory route and go with some vegetables and a protein. You can roast them again with herbs and Parmesan or just by themselves. You can sear them in a pan rather than roasting if that's the option you want to take there. Or you can use them as a soup base as well. Very similar preparation between the different types of squash, just slightly different flavors. And spaghetti squash are a really fun one. They are a large squash that once you roast them, you can use a fork and peel out all the stringy flesh. You'll want to choose a hard, bright yellow squash for the best flavor, and these can also be stored up to several months in a cool, dark place. Again, full of antioxidants, fiber, potassium, vitamin C, and B6. So of course, as the name implies, once you peel out that stringy flesh from the spaghetti squash, you can top it with your favorite pasta sauces and other pasta ingredients and have a delicious low-carb pasta night. You can stuff them. I've done a more Mexican flavored stuffed spaghetti squash with rice, beans, tomatoes, corn, pepper, and cheese, and that was really delicious. One of these pictures here has some shrimp on it, so maybe a lighter, more seafood-like take on the spaghetti squash. I think that would be interesting with some lemon drizzled on it too. Or you could even take that stringy flesh and turn it into something like hash browns or fritters, or even a low-carb pizza crust by consolidating them all, pushing them down, and forming them into those shapes before you cook them. Pumpkins are another edible winter squash, and these are good for more than just decorations and pies. You'll want to choose smaller varieties if you can. They are a little bit more sweeter, and these can be stored for about 3 months in a cool, dark place off the floor. If you've decorated or displayed decorated pumpkins, it's best not to eat those ones. So get your decorating pumpkins and your edible pumpkins, but keep them separate for just the best health benefits. And this one can be used very similarly to butternut squash. You can roast the seeds, you can make a pumpkin soup, add the roasted chunks to salads or stews or different casseroles. You can use the roasted seeds as well to top those casseroles or soups or salads for a little bit of extra crunch. And of course, the pureed pumpkin you can use in baked goods and pies. Some other types of winter squash you might see around are the Hubbard squash, which get really quite large, the buttercup squash, dumpling squash, which look very similar to those delicatas we talked about, and the kabocha or kabocha squash. And these are all edible types as well. But Hubbard squash I would be very interested in trying because it is just so big, and I would love to see all of the different things I could make out of that amount of squash. So those are the squash I had planned to talk to you about today. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, I will be hosting a live Q&A on Medina County District Library's Facebook page. So there will be a post about the squash soiree, and you can comment with any of your suggestions or questions at 6:30 p.m. And again, if you would like to even just share a recipe, your favorite recipe of different squash, that would be fantastic. I would love to hear what you all are doing with these and help our community benefit from the harvest of squash that we're seeing this year. Don't forget to tune in to more of our virtual events at the MCDL YouTube page and check our events calendar at mcdl.info for more live events. Happy cooking, and I look forward to talking more with you at 6:30. Thanks.